let's be real for a second. How do we actually decide what's fair? I mean, we all have that gut feeling, right? That internal alarm that goes off when we see something we know is just wrong. But how do you take that feeling and turn it into a set of rules that works for everybody, for an entire society? Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today, a really powerful method from the philosopher John Rawls for building a just society from the ground up.
So here's our game plan. We're going to start with this big puzzle of fairness. Then we'll get into Rawls's incredible method for solving it, run a pretty wild thought experiment to figure out our rules and see what principles of justice actually shake out. And finally, we'll tie it all together to see how this leads to a society that's not just fair, but also stable.
All right, let's get right into it. We're starting with the fundamental problem that Rawls was really trying to crack, a challenge that, honestly, sits at the very heart of how we all manage to live together.
Seriously, think about it. You know deep down when something is unjust. But here's the thing, your gut feeling might not be exactly the same as your neighbor's. So how do we bridge that gap? How do we go from these powerful personal gut feelings to a set of principles that everyone can look at and say, yeah, that's fair? That's the big question.
Well, Rawls says we don't just pull these rules out of thin air. We start with what he calls our considered judgments. These are the moral beliefs we're most confident in. The things we believe when we're thinking clearly, without being emotional or biased. Think of them as our moral anchors. Things like, slavery is absolutely wrong, or discriminating against someone for their beliefs is unjust. These are our non-negotiables, our starting points.
Okay, so we've got our anchors, but how do we build a whole system of justice from them? This is where Rawls introduces a brilliant tool for thinking, and he calls it reflective equilibrium. The key here is this back and forth idea. This isn't about finding one single perfect rule and having that dictate everything else. No, it's more like putting together a giant puzzle. You're constantly moving between your specific beliefs and the general principles, tweaking them both until everything just fits, until it all forms one coherent picture.
Here's how it would actually work. You start with one of those strong judgments, like racial discrimination is unjust. Then you try to come up with a general principle that explains why it's unjust. Maybe something like, everyone deserves an equal shot at success. But then, what happens if that principle leads to a weird conclusion in a different scenario? Well, now you've got to make a choice. Do you tweak the principle, or do you rethink your initial judgment? You go back and forth, refining and adjusting, until your specific beliefs and your general principles are in perfect sync.
But where do these big general principles even come from? How do we come up with them in a way that isn't just based on our own biases? Rawls says we need a totally fair starting point. And for that, he came up with one of the most famous thought experiments ever.
Okay, picture this. You're in a room with a bunch of other people, and your job is to design society from scratch. You have to agree on the most basic rules of justice that will apply to everyone. But to make sure the game isn't rigged, Rawls adds a killer twist.
This is the secret sauce. To make sure nobody can tilt the rules in their own favor, everyone has to make their decisions from behind what he calls the veil of ignorance. It's an imaginary barrier that hides all the information about who you are.
I mean, you literally know nothing. You don't know if you'll be rich or poor, what your race or gender will be, whether you'll be smart or strong, or even what your religious beliefs will be. You're stripped of everything that makes you, you. You have to pick the rules for society knowing that you could end up being anybody.
And this quote from Rawls just nails it. The veil creates a level playing field. Since you can't design the rules to benefit yourself, you're forced to choose principles that are fair to everyone, no matter who they turn out to be.
So, from this position of ignorance, what's the smart play? Would you gamble on something like utilitarianism, which aims for the greatest happiness for the greatest number? It sounds good, but there's a huge risk. You could end up in a minority group that gets sacrificed for everyone else's benefit. Rawls says, no way. No rational person would take that risk. Instead, you'd play it safe. You'd use a maximum strategy. You'd pick the rules that make the worst-off person in society as well off as they can possibly be. Why? Because that worst-off person might be you.
All right, so the hypothetical votes are in. What principles do we actually choose from, behind the veil? Let's look at the big payoff from this whole experiment.
The first thing everyone agrees on, no question, is that we need to protect our basic liberties. We're talking freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the right to vote, the fundamentals. And here's the kicker. This principle has absolute priority. That means these rights are non-negotiable. You can't trade them away for more money or for a more efficient economy or for anything else. They are the bedrock.
The second principle deals with money and status. It says inequalities are okay, but only if they meet two strict conditions. First, everyone has to have a truly fair shot at getting the best jobs and positions. And second, and this is the famous difference principle, any inequalities that exist must be set up to benefit the people at the very bottom of the ladder the most. So, a CEO can earn more than a janitor, but only if that system ultimately helps the janitor more than any other system would.
This table really makes the difference pop. Utilitarianism basically says we can add up everyone's happiness, and if sacrificing one person makes the total number go up, that's okay. Rawls says that's fundamentally wrong. He believes in the separateness of persons, the idea that your life is your life, and it can't be canceled out by someone else's happiness in some big social math problem. That's why his system is designed to protect every single individual, especially the most vulnerable.
Okay, so this is all some pretty heavy philosophy. We have our gut feelings, a method to make them coherent, and two principles of justice. But what does any of this mean for us, in the real, messy world we actually live in?
Because these principles, justified in this fair and impartial way, can create what Rawls calls an overlapping consensus. This is a huge deal for modern, diverse societies like ours. It means we don't all have to agree on religion or philosophy or what the meaning of life is, but we can all agree on the basic rules of the game, the core principles of justice. A Christian, a Muslim, an atheist, they can all support these principles, each for their own reasons, from within their own worldview.
And that's the whole journey, right there. You see how it all connects? We start with our own gut feelings about what's right. We use reflective equilibrium to test them against fair principles, building a consistent moral framework. That shared framework gets broad support, creating an overlapping consensus. And the result? A society that's not just fair, but is stable because people genuinely believe in its foundations.
So, I'll leave you with this. This whole idea isn't just for philosophers in an ivory tower. It's a tool for all of us. When you think about what a fair society looks like, do your own gut feelings and your broader principles actually match up? Do they cohere? Take a second to think about it. Can you find that state of harmony, that reflective equilibrium in your own beliefs about justice?